This newer Honda mower belongs to a friend of mine, and it turns out they're using it commercially, which I find absolutely amazing. The reason is you would normally use the commercial version of this mower to do that kind of work, but at over $900, I can understand why they would choose the $500 version instead. The only thing is, I think the work is finally taking its toll on it. In today's video, we look at this Honda HRN mower, and the problem is that the recoil is not winding the rope back up like it's supposed to. Now, I've always wondered what kind of abuse a residential mower could take, especially when used commercially, and hate to say it, by the looks of this one, it takes a huge toll on it. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. As you can see, the rear tire has been almost destroyed, leaving only a strip of tire left on the plastic wheel. Now, I wasn't asked to look at the wheel, and to be honest, if they needed a new wheel, they can order one from a giant online store just as easily as I can, and replacing it is of course a breeze. Out of curiosity, I wanted to check the oil and see its condition, especially since it's being heavily used. Luckily, it appears to be very fresh and at a decent level, which is a good sign it's being maintained. Now, after looking into the fuel tank, it also appears to have a full tank of gasoline, which means I get to extensively test this mower on my own lawn. Now, I might have to take back my statement about it being maintained. Now, you don't have to replace the air filter every year, but at least try and clean the filter throughout the season. This isn't important at the moment, so I'll take care of this later on. Once I've done an inspection, I'm going to look at the rope and the issues it's having. As you can see, it's not working at all, which makes me think we have an issue with the spring. Hopefully it's not broken, because taking out a broken spring can be very dangerous. To get to the spring, we need to remove the top cover on the engine, and because of lean manufacturing, it's really easy to do that. Now, the top only snaps into place with 4 tabs, 2 on each side of the engine. All we have to do is remove one screw and then pull the tabs away from the engine. Now, these tabs are not that easy to get to, so using a screwdriver might be helpful. Also, because they don't want you to lose your fuel cap, it's tethered to the cover, so we'll need to take that off as well. Now, because I don't want stuff like dirt and leaves to get into the tank, I'm going to put the fuel cap back onto the tank. Now, you don't have to do this, but this could prevent issues later on, so this only benefits you. Next, I'll remove the bolts that hold the recoil to the engine and then remove it. And since I want to work on the table, I'm also going to remove the rope from its guide on the handle. Once on the table, I can see that the spring seems to somewhat be working, because the few turns that are still on the spring is still trying to wind the rope back up, so I don't think the spring is broken. As a test, I need to put a few more turns on it so I can wind the rest of the rope back onto the pulley. While winding the spring, I heard the spring slip inside the assembly. Just to make sure what I heard, I tried to put more turns on it, and sure enough, it slipped again. I think I know what's happened, but I need to get to the spring to make sure, because this is a rather rare thing to happen. Now, on this particular recoil, the bolt is left-hand thread, which means instead of turning it clockwise to tighten it, it instead loosens it. That means that when we put this thing back together, we'll have to turn it counterclockwise to install it. Once the bolt is loose, I took it and the guide plate off the assembly. Next, I'll take out the small spring off the post and then carefully remove the pulley to reveal the larger spring. Now, do this very cautiously, because it could unwind itself and fly out of the assembly. So this is the inner end of the spring, and it's supposed to anchor itself to the pulley here on this notch in the post. Now, this part looks fine other than a lot of dirt, which I'll have to get rid of. I don't think this dirt is the problem, but it's certainly not going to help much either. After we clean as much off as possible, we'll look at the pulley and the spring. So here's the pulley, and the spring sits inside it. The other end of the spring is supposed to grab this opening in the pulley, and the end is there, but it doesn't look like there's much to anchor with. To get a better look at it, I'll have to remove it, and this is where you have to be very careful. After carefully removing it, I'll then slowly let it unwind, and then we'll inspect it. After letting it unwind, it would appear the bent end of the spring has somehow unbent itself. I have an idea of how to fix it, but first I want to try and clean all the dirt and grease off the spring. For this part, I'd like to use some brake cleaner on a rag or even a paper towel. You might have to go over it a couple times, but eventually it should get clean enough for us to continue. Once the spring is clean, I'm also going to clean the dirt out of the pocket for the spring as well. It doesn't have to be spotless, just mostly clean. After that, I'll then tackle the spring. Now the end of the spring did not break, it looks to have just unbent itself. The fix is to rebend the spring, but not at the same spot, but instead in a slightly different location. Also, don't bend it too sharply, otherwise it will definitely break. Once the spring end has been fixed, I'll then rewind the spring. Now this takes some practice, and if you've never done this before, then this will be a workout. Now you might be wondering why I didn't just replace the spring, and the answer is quite simple. I don't think I needed to. Yes, there is a possibility that it might bend back out, or it might even break, but since I bent the spring in a different spot, I think the chances are pretty good that it won't. Once the spring has been wound back tightly enough for it to fit inside the pulley, I'll then put it back in. Now if you're uncertain about how the spring is supposed to sit, it might have been a good idea to have taken pictures before taking it out. In this case, you can always rewind this video to help you figure out how it goes back in. As you just saw, I didn't wind the spring enough for it to fit, so I had to take it back out again and make it a bit tighter. After that, it finally fit, and now we can start to put it back together. I'm going to put some lithium grease where the old grease was. Just make sure you use a brand of lithium grease that says it's okay to be used on plastics. If you don't have any, try using some WD-40 instead. When installing the pulley and spring, your only job is to make sure this end of the spring is in a position so it can hook into the opening on the post in the other half of the assembly. Just take your time, and you might have to turn it a few times before it's able to grab it. Once it's in place, we can then replace the pawls, the small spring, the guide plate, and of course the screw. Remember, on this screw, you'll have to turn it counterclockwise to tighten it, and try not to strip the plastic it's going into, otherwise you may have a big problem on your hands. Once that's done, we can then wind the spring using the rope. I'm only going to put a few turns on it and then see if it's enough to wind all of the rope onto the pulley. If not, I'll then add a couple more turns to it. Try to resist the urge to put too many turns on it, otherwise the spring might bind up. After straightening the rope out, we can see that all of the rope is able to wind back up onto the pulley, which is great news, and the pawls are working just like they're supposed to. That means we can put the recoil assembly back onto the engine and test it out. The really neat part is that with all the production streamlining, putting it back together is extremely simple and takes no time at all. Another reason why the recoil would stop working is that the pulley could be jammed against the starter cup on the top of the flywheel. Now if that was the case, once we had removed the assembly from the engine, the recoil would not have been jammed anymore, and the recoil would have pulled all the rope back in. If that did happen, we'd have to figure out why and then fix it so it doesn't happen again. Once we put the pull rope back on its guide, I think it's time to see if the recoil is going to work or if it's going to jam up again because the spring I bent finally broke. It looks like it's holding up well, and only time will tell if it happens again. To be honest, since I don't know how it happened in the first place, I can only guess as to why it happened, and I have two guesses as to why. The first guess is the metal the spring is made out of. Over time, the spring end couldn't hold the shape it was put into and slowly started to straighten itself back out. And the second is a manufacturing error where the spring end was bent but not enough to handle all the stress of repeated use. So in the end, I don't think commercial use was the reason the spring let go. It only made it happen 2 years after buying it instead of taking several years. I really don't blame the user for it, and who knows, maybe I'll see this mower again sooner than later. If that does happen, I'll replace the spring with a new one. So my question is, would you have done what I did and saved the owner money and 2 days of downtime to his business, or would you have replaced the spring instead? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.